Hello everyone, thank you for joining this event, this Insights event on the impact of inspection on probation. Thanks so much for joining us today. So our event is being hosted today by Sonia, Flynn, Chief Probation Officer. Unfortunately, she's having terrible IT issues this morning, and we're really hoping that she's going to join us very soon. Otherwise, you're stuck with me for the moment. So I'm Nick Bellamy, and I'm Head of Engagement in the Insights Group. So what I'll do is I'll kick things off today by introducing everyone and getting our presenters off to a good start. And then, as I said, hopefully Sonia will be joining us very, very soon. We're going to be using Slido today for a couple of questions because we really want to get your ideas, suggestions, etc. So if you can either have that open either on your mobile phones if you've got the app, or you can have it open on your browser. There'll be two questions. One will be shortly after this introduction, and then the second one will be just following our presentations and just before the Q&A section. And we really want to engage with you. We've got about 225 people joining us today, so it's a really good turnout. And we really want to hear from you in terms of your ideas and any questions you may have for the panel. Okay. So we've got a couple of housekeeping information here for you. So the first thing to say, and we've already had quite a few inquiries about this, so the event is being recorded, and once it's ready and it's been subtitled, it'll be available on My Learning for all attendees. So even if you're outside of the organisation, we have arranged for this to be made available to you, and we'll send you the link once it's ready. It might take a couple of weeks, but it will be there. We'd ask, please, that you keep your microphone on mute while others are speaking, but if you can, it'd be great if you keep your camera on. We'll be using the chat function in Teams for any comments or questions, and again, please do write your questions or any suggestions that you have in there, and we will ask the panel. And as I said, we will be using Slido for a couple of polls during the session, and you can see the code at the bottom there, but don't worry, we'll be showing that code to you again when we ask the first question. So I'm really delighted that we've got a fantastic panel of guests lined up for you today. So today we're going to be hearing from Jake Phillips, who's a reader in criminology at Sheffield Hallum, and Jake is the person who's written the research. So I'm hoping you've had a chance to have a look at that. It was in the ticket, but if not, don't worry, because Jake will give you all of the key messages from that today. Then we're also going to hear from Mark Baker, who's Director of Operations in HMI Probation, and Tammy Burrows, Effective Practice Lead in HMI Probation, talking about the implications of this research for HMIP and what they are doing to respond to that. And then we've also got Kilvinda Viggers, who's our Regional Probation Director in London, along with Adam Breyer, who's an SPO in Harrow and Barnet. And they're going to be talking about the implications for probation and the things that we can do in probation in response to the research. And last but not least, we're going to hear from Deborah Perkins, who's a Community Assurance Lead in OSAG, and Heather Wright, Quality and Effective Practice Lead in EPSIG. And now both OSAG and EPSIG are HQ functions in HMPPS. So they'll be talking a little bit about the support already on offer and anything further that we can do from a HQ perspective to support inspections. So as I said, we really want to hear from you. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for you to get involved, either by asking questions, sharing your experiences, and making suggestions. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and then we're going to get the first Slido question. So over to you, Charlotte. All right, so there's your code. It's there on the side as well. So you can either go on the browser at slido.com, or you can open the app on your phone and put that code in. So anyone, I don't know if anyone's dialed in, it's hashtag 723284. And the first question, in a few words, and please only use a few words because otherwise the word cloud will be massive. What feelings or thoughts do you have when you hear that an inspection has been announced for your area? And please be honest. We're already getting some, interesting ones here. Anxiety, panic, dread, a big one. Apprehension. Yeah, you've got to clear your diary. You've already got a full caseload that you need to see. It's additional work. Some people are interested and excited. Stressed. It's an opportunity. That's a good one. It's time consuming. Apprehension. So the bigger words are the ones that most people are saying. So just to let you know, if people put the same word in, then they are the ones that sort of appear larger on the screen. Trepidation and concern. Planning. Yeah, operational disruption. A good one there about how partners will be included. Perhaps we can have that question a bit later about involving partners. Exposure. Yeah. Really, another inspection? Hope it's not my case. Oh my goodness, I remember that. And if it is my cases, please don't let it be that one. Yeah, lots. I mean, dread seems to be the biggest word here on the screen, which is an awful feeling, isn't it? It's come around quickly. Let's do our very best. That's a positive one. I like that. What's the theme? It's going to be huge. We've got a huge workload. Who's going to lead it? And how do we support staff through this? Very good one. And in fact, a lot of our discussion today is going to focus on that. So thank you for putting that in. I better tidy my cases up. And again, that's going to be another theme today, talking about how we prep. And should we prep? Okay, I'll leave it another minute. If anyone else who's perhaps having trouble logging on to Slido. And don't worry if you don't get an opportunity to put forward your views here, because there'll be plenty of opportunity. A chance to show what we can do. Yeah. Yeah, and there are quite a few positive comments in here, but we can see from the larger words that mainly they're around stress, fear, apprehension. But then there is too that learning and interest are coming up quite big as well, which is great. And it is a chance for us to learn. Okay, I think we'll pause there, Charlotte, thanks for showing that, and we'll kick off on our first presentation. So I'm delighted to welcome Jake Phillips from Sheffield Hallum. And Jake has completed some research on the impact of inspection on probation. Thank you, Jake, for sharing your slides. So I'm going to hand straight over to Jake, who's going to give us an overview of the key messages from his research. Over to you, Jake.
Thanks very much, Nick, and thank you to everybody for coming. It's really good to see so many people online and interested in this topic. So I thought it'd be helpful if I just give a little bit of background to kind of the research, and then I'll give a quick overview of some of the findings. So the research that I did, in fact, before I start, I thought that Slido was really interesting. Thanks for contributing to that. And in fact, it sums up quite nicely the findings from the research. Dread, big in the middle, but then some other stuff, you know, positive and negative all around the science. So this research started really a couple of years ago when I was doing some work. I was trying to write a lecture for undergraduate students on governance in the criminal justice system. And I had a look to see what research was out there on inspection. And there was very little. And there was none, as far as I could see, around inspection, specifically in the field of probation, which is my area of study and has been for quite a number of years now. So thinking that my Google Scholar searching skills weren't up to scratch, I emailed Robin Moore, the head of research at the Inspectorate of Probation, and said, Robin, I don't think there's any research. Do you know of any? And he replied and said, no, I don't think there is any. So I asked if I could do some. And the inspectorate were very helpful in facilitating access to the research. And so thank you to those inspectors who I followed around and asked annoying questions in the middle of inspections when you were trying to do your work. And thanks to the practitioners as well, who I observed and sat in the corner and listened in to those case interviews. So although the research was facilitated by the inspectorate, and I couldn't have done it without them, it was also independent, so they didn't commission me to do the research. It was funded by the British Academy, and I set the research questions myself, and so on. So this is, hopefully can be seen as a rigorous independent piece of work. So a little bit of background to the inspectorate. You don't really need to know this. Most of you already know this a little bit, hopefully already. HMI Probation, it was created in 1936. So it's got a long history of, inspecting probation services, supporting effective practice, and having some oversight of training as well in its early days. It was put on a statutory footing in the Criminal Justice Act 1991, along with the other criminal justice inspectorates. And these days, it's responsible primarily for inspecting probation and youth justice services in England and Wales. The focus for the research and the focus for today is just adult probation. I haven't done anything around the youth justice side. And the mission, HMIP's mission, is to promote positive changes in probation and youth justice, recommendations, research and effective practice guidance drive improvements at individual, local and national levels. It leads to improved outcomes for adults on probation, and so on. And what I was really interested in was whether the work of the inspector really does drive improvements at individual, local and national levels, and how people who are inspected experience that process of inspection. There isn't very much research on inspection, like I said. If we look beyond the field of criminal justice, there's more. So specifically in the field of education, so there's been some research done on Ofsted, how it operates, how teachers experience it and what the impact of it is. There's some research in the field of social care and health. So CQC has been subjected to kind of research as well. And the risk of kind of generalizing that, reasonably sized body of research, we see the potential and the risk and an actual accountability overload. So this is where organizations are inspected, monitored, audited kind of too much, or in ways which kind of reduce efficiency, actually are counterproductive, reduce effectiveness, because organizations become too focused on the governance, too focused on the inspection and the audit process, and it takes them away from their day-to-day jobs, the work that they actually want to be doing. Across all kind of fields where there has been research on inspection, the jury is still very much out on whether inspection does improve the quality of practice, even in in education where there's been quite a lot more research. There is some research which says yes, there's others which research says kind of no, certainly kind of an ambivalent kind of conclusions. And there's a reasonable amount of evidence to suggest that inspection can result in unintended consequences. So yes, it might have laudable aims, but what it can do to organisations cannot always be all that positive. In the criminal justice system, what little research there has been is summed up on this slide. So like I said, no research has really sought to understand its impact on practice, policy or practitioners in probation. So as far as I know, and this is the first empirical study of inspection in probation. If we look at research in other criminal justice institutions, the legitimacy of the inspectorate comes out as something that's really important. If the inspectorate or the monitoring body, so Bean and Kirkham's research was looking at inspection, but also IMBs in the context of prisons and the PPO. If those monitoring bodies are seen as legitimate by practitioners and in their case prisoners, then they argue they're more likely to get their recommendations implemented. There's really low levels of awareness about inspection in prisons amongst prisoners, so people in prison. And that's really important because inspections, especially in prison, are there to protect prisoners, but prisoners don't know about it. We need a good balance between directors, detectors, and effectors. So directors are people who set the strategy. They say, this is where I want the organisation to be going. So that could be the chief inspector or in setting the standards, or it could be the chief probation officer in saying this is where we want to go with the probation service in England and Wales. Then you need detectors. So that's, for our purposes today, the inspector, the people who go in and work out, is this organisation doing what it's supposed to be doing? And then you need effectors, and they're the people who put those recommendations into place. And quite a bit of the research in this area, and Philippa Tomczak shows this quite effectively in her book, looking at suicides in prison, that we've got loads of directors, loads of detectors, but not really enough effectors, and not, you know, you need more attention being paid to actually putting some of those things into practice. And like I said, the evidence from the broader field around whether inspection actually improves practice is still out, and the National Audit Office and Stephen Shute argue that in their research. So, like I said, the aim of my research was to broadly understand the impact of inspection on probation, practice and policy. That's how I started, and I've added in practitioners because that came out as a really important theme in the research. And in order to understand that, I did what I'm describing as a mixed methodological qualitative study comprising observations and interviews. So first of all, I observed some inspections. This was partly because I didn't really know what an inspection looked like. I've never worked in probation. I used to work with probation. I used to be like an ETE worker and a DIP worker and so on. But I've never worked as a probation officer. So I'd never experienced an inspection, and I wanted to experience that as closely as I could. So I sat in and I watched case interviews between inspectors and practitioners. I sat in on focus groups with practitioners. I observed meetings between inspectors and kind of senior leaders and managers within services and external partners. And I went on an unpaid work site visit as well. And that was across 5 different inspections. So 1 NPS division, 2 CRCs, 1 thematic, and then the inspection of the central function of HMPPS. So that was really for me to understand inspection, but also for me to see whether inspection did have an impact kind of in the immediate. You know, can I see something in a case interview, you know, an inspector saying something to a practitioner who then immediately goes off and does something. I then conducted interviews. So in total, I did 77 interviews, spoke to 77 people, did 1 focus group. And that was with inspectors, leaders within HMIP, probation staff who had been inspected, leaders within the NPS and CRCs, and also a group of external stakeholders. With this probation staff, I interviewed them immediately after the inspection. So I said, how was that for you? Tell me about it. So it was a focused interview really on that process of the case interview. And then I also tried to interview them after the report was published in order to get a sense of whether they felt like the findings in the report were accurate, a reflection of reality on the ground. Now that bit got stymied a little bit by the pandemic because I couldn't do the follow-up interviews, but that was the plan. So briefly then, in terms of the findings, the biggest finding, the most obvious finding, was that inspection puts organisations and practitioners under a huge amount of pressure, and it takes them away from their day jobs. It takes up a lot of time. And this pressure, this anxiety, this fear, which was one of the first words that came up on the Slido, was there, you know, right from the outset when I started interviewing practitioners. So people said, you know, this CRC member of staff felt a lot more pressure to get things right, more pressured than normal. MPS probation officer talked about having to anxiety manage their management team, which they found very unhelpful. The management team gets anxious. There were all sorts of emails that go out about how to give the best impression. There's leave cancelled, people told they can't go on leave, things like that. So people describe that experience of finding out that the inspectorate's coming when you get that, the dates that they're coming, the 3 weeks that they're coming, the temperature goes up, the email traffic goes up, anxiety goes up, concern goes up, preparation starts kind of immediately for those practitioners. I think for senior leaders, I think it had already started by that point. And there was no doubt that inspection takes up a lot of time. So these two quotes from CRC senior leaders, I suppose we need to just bear in mind the fact that I did this research prior to unification a few months ago. And I think it would be fair to say that CRCs felt like they got a poor deal from inspection. They felt like they weren't always treated all that fairly. Now, I'm not going to judge, I'm not going to say whether that is an accurate, fair feeling or not, but that's certainly the impression I got from them. Anyway, they said that, you know, never underestimate how much work goes on from a CRC, and I dare say the MPS must cost thousands, hundreds of thousands in man hours. The amount of pre-audit work that was done, it took people away from their everyday stuff. And that had a big impact on us as a team, really, because everyone was sort of involved in it. I certainly got that message from the MPS as well. I think it was a little bit less acute. I think that CRCs were running on tighter margins in terms of capacity. And so when a new lot of work arrived, like preparing for an inspection, it really took its toll. Whereas in the MPS, that was a little bit less acute, but it was still a really strong theme that I identified in the MPS interviews. So that, you know, that operational impact was really quite significant. People talked about, sorry, I was going to go back. People talked about how they were unable to get hold of their managers all of a sudden. The SPOs would kind of go off and be busy doing inspection stuff, and they needed to talk to them about, you know, a day-to-day thing, an OASIS review, a potential breach or recall, something like that. And I was really interested in this preparation. And Nick mentioned it, you know, when you were filling in the Slido. And the preparation was a really strong thing, and it's where people started off when I asked them about how the inspection was. And this was not across the board, but certainly amongst practitioners. And really interesting in this quote here on the slide from a local assessor who sees both sides of what's going on, really, because they are an employee of the probation service, seconded out to the inspectorate to do the inspection. And I said, well, what do you think about this level of preparation? The preparation being tidying up case files, crossing T's, dotting I's, going back through, doing reviews that maybe were missed, or doing reviews for the sake of it, even when they weren't due, doing safeguarding checks, maybe that were missed, or maybe that hadn't been done in the first place. And this local assessor said, honestly, I think it defeats the object. You're putting all this, you're changing everything to fit the inspection, when an inspection should be on how it is. Because how are you going to learn if you're making these errors if actually you put all the preparation into everything's tip-top by the time the inspectors see it? CRC member of staff, now I know my cases, they weren't the truth because they'd been made to look as good as they possibly could for the inspectorate. Now, I think it's important just to say this was a view that came primarily from practitioners and inspectors, senior leaders within HMI Probation and leaders within probation services didn't agree with this. And inspectors would say, I can see when something's been done because everything on Indelius is time stamped. I can see whether you know, a review was done late. And in fact, I'm not even bothered whether it was done late. I'm actually interested in the quality of that review, which is fine. And I totally take that point of view. I think what's really important, though, is that if we've got practitioners who feel like the findings that are coming out of an inspection are inaccurate because of all this preparation that goes on, all this tidying up that goes on, then that kind of undermines the legitimacy of the inspection findings. And if we go back to that research on inspectioning prisons, which argued that legitimacy of the monitoring body, the inspectorate, is really important for impacting on practice, then that's a really important thing to bear in mind. Inspections of emotional experiences. Probation is an emotional, being a probation officer or a probation services officer or a residential worker in an AP are emotionally taxing, and SPOs is an emotionally taxing job. I've written elsewhere about the emotional labour of doing probation work, and the emotions of inspection came out really strongly in the interviews. So this fear of being blamed, for not doing stuff, and actually this feeling that, you know, not doing stuff when I couldn't do anything differently because of whatever, workloads, something like that. So real anxiety about that, people questioning their own practice. And again, feeling like that was coming top down from the management, down to practitioners, and then practitioners having to deal with that. People talked about the culture of the organisation being quite anxious. I think it's probably worth just bearing in mind that the research was done, I don't know, in the aftermath of the McCann case, for sure, and, you know, other high profile cases where the probation service had received pretty bad press. And I think that that was being felt through inspections. On the other hand, I've been really negative so far. On the other hand, some people, not everybody, some people felt like that preparation could be really positive. And if it was done well, then people felt supported and people could use it as a learning exercise. And this probation officer, who was fairly inexperienced, said that it gave them kind of a boost. They just joined the IOM team, and you know, doing that preparation with their SPO was really good. Another area that was actually really positive was the case interview. Now, people dreaded the inspection, they had a fear, but actually when I talked to people about that interview itself with the inspector, bar 2 members of staff, practitioners, it was really positive. And people were like, oh, it was actually really good. I was really worried, but the process was good. People said, I think this, I mean, I can't say it any better than this. The analogy would be you're more nervous going to the hospital having a leg off than actually having a leg off. I think that's great. You know, the inspecting was reasonable, no surprise questions, because actually you're the expert and the inspector is the visitor and you should know more about the case. And people liked that conversational dialogic approach to case interviews where they could talk about decisions they'd made, why they'd made them, and so on. So probation officer in the MPS, I think the actual inspection was less of a big deal than management made it out to be. I was more stressed in the week leading up to the inspection, doing remedial work, having my cases scrutinised, having to do a new assessment. Now, you could say that the inspection was a less big deal because of that preparatory work, and I don't think I quite know which it is. But I think it's an important thing nonetheless. People found that case interview to be a time for reflection, a reflective discussion which is missing ordinarily because of high workloads. So to sit down for 45 minutes to an hour with somebody who knows probation work, you don't have to explain what probation is to an inspector, so that's quite a nice refreshing change. It's a chance to talk about what you do with that person. And this is a quote from an SPO, but it was more than kind of reflected in the interviews that I had with frontline practitioners too. And the other really strong theme here was people found it validating to get that positive feedback. So inspectors were like, you've done really well here, you've done a good job. And people were like, I don't normally get that positive feedback from my organisation. And that was a really nice, refreshing change. I think that tells us something about the organisation. We know that probation has been under-resourced, undervalued, understaffed for years, and TR certainly didn't help with that, and it's gone through another huge structural change and so on. But, you know, it's an important point. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to go fairly quickly. I was interested in the impact on practice, and what I found really interesting was practitioners found it actually quite hard to identify specific ways in which inspection had impacted on their practice. And where they did, it was often about, well, I just learned that I need to keep my cases up to date, so I don't have to do all that preparatory work, that remedial work next time. I learned that I need to keep better case records. Nothing, well, I'm sure there was, but nothing really substantive kind of came out from that. On the organizational side, though, senior leaders could, you know, list the impact that inspection has on their organizations, both positive and kind of negative. So in terms of thematics, people were really positive. They were like, oh yeah, we've learned that, we've learned that. More negative, people talked about how inspection findings can have an impact on morale amongst the staff, can have an impact in terms of organisational reputation, can exacerbate high workloads, and so on. And they argued that implementing the findings can sometimes be quite difficult because, again, I think this more came from the CRCs and the MPS, but that the context, they felt like the context was not always taken into account, and sometimes some of those tensions between having to do one thing which meets inspection standards at the same time as do something else which meets what OSAG wants them to do was not always taken into account in inspection findings, and that makes implementing the action plans that come out of an inspection difficult. So just to sum up then, the extent of the preparation in fact, before I say that, I would say that overall people were positive about inspection. It's when you got down into the specifics that the negative stuff came out. The extent of the preparation has a real operational impact, and it does impact, I would argue, for practitioners on the perception around the accuracy of the findings. It's an emotive experience, and that comes from pressure from management, fear of being blamed, back covering culture, and so on. The case interview is generally experienced positively, especially when we think about it in the context of that pre-inspection pressure. Practitioners found it hard to identify impact on practice, but leaders, managers were said that actually, no, inspection does have an impact on what they do, and generally a fairly positive impact as well. So I came up with a few implications, but I think we're going to talk about implications anyway as part of the panel. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be interested to hear what people have to say.
Thanks so much, Jake. And if you've got any questions for Jake or any comments on what Jake has said or any reflections from your own experiences, please put them in the chat, and we will be putting all questions to the panelists at the end of the presentations. So if you've just joined us and you weren't here at the start, Sonia, Flynn, who was due to be hosting, and unfortunately having IT problems, I'm hoping she'll be able to join us towards the end of the session. So now we are going to hand over to find out about the HMI Probation response to Jake's research. And we're going to be hearing from Mark Baker, who's Director of Operations, and Tammy Burrows, who is the Effective Practice Lead. So I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Hopefully you can see my slides.
Not yet, Mark.
Ah, right, okay, I've shared them. Apologies. Let me have another go at sharing them. I thought I was being clever as well by trying to share them in advance. Clearly not. Yeah, have another go.
There you go, Mark.
You can see them.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me along to this. And thank you, Jake, for sort of that excellent summary that you've just given. Okay. So obviously there are a number of implications for the inspectorate on here. And I don't, I think it's not right to say, yes, the implications are just for the management teams in the MPS and they need to get their act together and not panic so much. on inspections. I think there were things that we were doing that were causing the wrong tone to be set on inspections, and things that we wanted to address as well as a result of Jake's findings. So one of the first things we've done is look very much at the workload issue. Now, with our new inspection program, which kicks off in November, we very much wanted to inspect at a more local level, so at a PDU level. We haven't done that for many, many years. We've inspected at a divisional level or at a CRC level, and we pulled cases from across that CRC or across the division. What we wanted to do is actually move to something which was a lot more localized. So we have decided that we want to actually inspect every PDU, but we're going to do it over a 3-year period. So actually the impact on practitioners in those PDUs will hopefully be less intensive. So we'll go and do an inspection of each PDU once every 3 years. Also, we reflected very much on the load that we were placing on the inspected body, and I hate to use the burden word, but we try to minimise the burden. And something that came out from Jake's report very strongly is that we were having quite a significant impact, particularly on management teams within the inspected bodies. So what we've done is we still want the same sort of comprehensiveness of our ability to interview people and drill down on the issues that are related to our standards where we need to get evidence. But we've looked at our schedule of meetings and tried to reduce the need for multiple meetings. What we tended to find is that we would talk to a manager about unpaid work, and then 2 days later in the schedule, we'd be talking to the same manager about another particular topic. ETE or something like that. So what we've done is try to revisit those schedules so that we can actually deal with the issues when we have the manager in front of us, so they attend less meetings. We've also reflected quite a lot on this whole point that Jake was making about preparation for inspection. And one of the things you can do to reduce the preparation for inspection is actually reduce the amount of time that people have to prepare. It's a little bit of a difficult one, because if you reduce it, then people just say, oh, I've still got to prepare for inspection, but I've now got a lot less time to do it. So the intensity of the workload. And of course, you could go down the other route, which is the sort of Ofsted route for schools, where they have an unannounced inspections, and clearly that reduces the announcement time completely. But that's, for us, that's a logistical nightmare, because we want to interview and get the feedback from the responsible officers. And if you give the responsible officers no announcement time, then a lot of them will be away, they'll be on leave, they'll have other commitments and other meetings, which will then have to cancel at short notice. So we didn't want to go down that route. But what we have done is try to reduce the announcement time, particularly for PDU inspections. So we announce a region 7 weeks before we actually do field work at a PDU. But we announced the individual PDU inspection, the date of the inspection, 4 weeks before we go in and do field work. And we felt that was just about the minimum time we could give. Also, we've gone away from our approach on sampling. So we used to pull a sample of all cases, and then we'd apply certain sort of rules on those, and we'd end up with a case sample set. We've now made that a lot simpler, because that was causing quite a lot of complexity and quite a lot of extra work for the CRCs and the divisions, and obviously it would do for the region. So what we've now decided to do is pull all cases from a defined 2-week period, and that 2-week period will be 6 months, between 6 and 8 months before we go in and do the inspection. So we don't say which 2 weeks we're going to do until quite close to the inspection, but we pull all cases within that period rather than going through a sampling process. And we think that's going to reduce the burden as well. Also, another element of this was a lot of management time spent in preparation on inspection on preparing evidence in advance. And we've got the opportunity with the regions and the PDUs to do that a lot better. So basically, when we collect evidence in advance, if it's something that applies across all regions or across all PDUs in regions, then we collect that evidence in advance once. We don't keep going out to every region to say, send us this policy every time, because that just creates unnecessary work. And we've been working quite closely with EPSIG at trying to resolve that problem. So hopefully regions and PDUs now will submit a lot less evidence in advance before we actually come and do the inspection. One of the other bits, and Jake didn't touch on this, but I know this was definitely part of his findings and report, was about our reports. And we were disappointed to read that because of the complexity and the length of some of our reports, a lot of practitioners weren't even looking at them. So they didn't feel that they had the time in their very busy days to actually trawl through one of our 60-page reports. Don't know why 60 pages, but you know, should be perfectly reasonable. But it wasn't. I mean, there's too much information in there. They were too long, and we weren't packaging them in a format which would be easily accessible to practitioners. So one of the things we've done on our reports is revisited our report templates, and we're trying to make them shorter. That's very much work in progress, and after each regional and PDU inspection, we will be reviewing that and seeing if we can make them even shorter. The other thing we've done on that is to focus very much on an additional type of product called an effective practice product, and Tammy from HMIP will talk about that shortly. One of the things that Jake mentioned was about the impact on morale about the report, because of course for transparency purposes we have to publish the report. You know, we're committed to publish it externally. It's important that we do that, but we've been trying very hard over the past couple of years actually to ensure that we play straight with our findings with the media, so we don't go chasing for headlines. We don't put headlines on the top of our press briefings just deliberately to just try and get us into those local media and paper and get us the TV interviews. We really try and play it straight, and that will continue to be our approach on that. And we work very closely with the press themselves, so that they understand the messages and they don't just pull some sort of message that's in the 15th paragraph of one of our press releases and focusing on that, because that's the exciting news for them. So we do try and work quite hard with the media, but we'll continue to do that. Also, there's something about the focus of our recommendations. Our recommendations, when we look back at them, are a little bit generic. And they're a little bit wide-ranging, and you can assess them in many different ways, and you could change the whole system of how you look at unpaid work, for example, on one of our recommendations, or focusing on a particular aspect of it. And we're working hard at trying to focus our recommendations so they don't result in wide-ranging work done to address them, unless that's necessary, of course, but really that we can really highlight those areas that we feel that should be focused on in order to address our findings. Some of the other things we have done, as Jake said, we do surveys after every single inspection, and we get every responsible officer to fill in a feedback form after the inspection to basically say, how was it for you? Because we need to learn, and it's an important part of our quality assurance process for our individual inspectors who are doing the interviews, that they get the opportunity to reflect and learn on what they could have done better in that case, in that responsible officer interview. Those interviews, those response sheets that we've got, and the survey findings we get from responsible officers are inevitably really positive. As Jake said, the fear of inspection is completely different to the actuality of the inspection, and most responsible officers really appreciate having the time to reflect on cases, and I think that's really important, and we want to try and emphasize that. We're not trying to find you out, we're not trying to trip you out, we're not trying to ask difficult questions. These are stuff, we use the Aspire model when we assess a case, and these are things that you'll be doing in your day-to-day practice. All we want to do is have a conversation with you to understand whether the right things have been done in that particular case. And the feedback we're getting is a lot of that's very positive, and we want staff to encourage that. I mean, one of the things that you can do to address the sort of negativity that goes along in inspection is for people who've been through to inspection to talk to colleagues, to get them not to worry too much, to get them to actually say it's not, no, they're not trying to trip you up. And I was going to refer to this slide, which I'll quickly put on. That's some feedback we had from our last inspection, which is BGSW and DDC. A few months ago, and this was a remote inspection. We didn't do this one face to face because of COVID, but there are always learning points from there. So we got positives there. Good interview, felt like a professional discussion about a case rather than interrogation. But interestingly, we do get opportunities for improvement all the time. Things like, I personally feel that inspections should be shorter notice. The amount of time people say that we should go down the no notice route as a practitioner is quite high, which is really interesting. And this piece about why we were given notice about when the inspection would take place and why we're informed in advance about which case would be looked at. Now, we have to inform in advance about the cases because we want to make sure the responsible officer's there when we come to interview them. So we have to give some notice, but it was interesting. That's the sort of feedback we're getting. And then a comment which I thought was quite useful, that actually in retrospect that people should have taken a more relaxed approach in terms of what to expect from the interview beforehand. And when we've had feedback using a sort of similar word cloud, it's interesting because it's opposite to the one that you've just put on there with Slido, but this is feedback after the individual case responsible officer interview. So it's not the fear of an interview, it's the feedback after. And we get we get comments like ease, process, good, relaxed, professional experience, helpful, positive, inspection friendly, warm. Yeah, and that's not just me pulling the positives and ignoring the negatives. That's generally the sorts of feedback we get from responsible officers after an interview. So other things we're going to do very quickly. Moving through the slides, we're going to emphasize the importance of management behaviors in our briefings to the management team. I mean, the things that Jake has said about don't over prepare, don't audit cases. It's a bit of a waste of time auditing cases because we spot when cases have been audited, and therefore why bother? Why suddenly do reviews when we can see that the review was done after the inspection was announced? So our message to management teams is don't prepare on cases, because it takes away from the actual point of inspection, which is we need to give honest feedback on what we find at that time. And we can spot it when people make changes at the last minute after the inspection anyway, because of the time stamping that goes on anything. So why bother doing all of that? And also, and this piece, I mean, building on what I said earlier about our reports, we recognise they're long and as a result may not be read by practitioners. So what we're trying to do, as well as making them shorter, we're also going to be, from every one of our inspections, our regional inspections, we're going to be leaning in. And what that means is our inspectors are going to make themselves available at a regional level to anybody on Teams. We'll organise an event at a regional level, so all the practitioners can actually log in through Teams, and we'll talk to them about our findings on the cases. We'll try and give them a brief summary of what we found, not just on what we call our Domain 2 case management and the responsible officer interviews, but also what we found on our Domain 1 organisational interviews as well. In addition, we're going to continue to work on developing other products that will hopefully be useful for practitioners. Some of these include research, which Robin Moore, who Jake mentioned earlier, Robin Moore's team do that within HMIP. But a really important component of our work going forward is effective practice, where we want to highlight what we feel are positive practice, so practitioners can learn from not just the negative, but also learn from the positive. At which point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Tammy, who's going to talk a little bit more about the effective practice products.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Hi, yeah, I'm the Effective Practice Lead for HMIP. And before I speak about our products, I wanted to just kind of locate you in the inspection process. So if you see it like a cycle, we have our evidence base, which is informed by our research team, subject leads, and that's people with operational expertise internally and externally, so leading academics, thematic and inspection findings, and our learning experience. And that all goes together and creates our standards framework. So that means it can be responsive to change. And then when we come out to do our core and thematic inspections, we inspect against those standards. And for anyone who wants to know more, we've got a copy of our inspection approach and our rules and guidance and standards all on our website. As Jake referred to earlier, and Mark, when people have the opportunity to speak about those cases and have those reflective practice discussions, that's an opportunity for us to give some immediate feedback. But a really important part of our work is then the promotion of findings. it's really important that people take things away from our inspections, and that's on a macro level in terms of the recommendations that are made, but also on a micro level about how individual practitioners can develop or enhance their practice. And that's where effective practice, I feel, really comes to life. Going back to Jake's research, and I'm going to read this directly. There was a quote from the National Audit Office that said, "Inspectorates should do more to exploit the knowledge created from their inspections by identifying and disseminating these findings, recommendations and good practice examples which have had the most impact." So our effective work stream does just that. And here, thank you, Mark, moving on so swiftly without me having to sound like Boris Johnson. So our definition of effective practice is where we see our standards delivered well in practice. And if we think about the previous slide, it's our standards as grounded in evidence, learning and experience. And so if you go onto our website, and on the next slide, I've just put a little promotion on there, so you can see we've got an effective practice page, shameless plug for our research and people on probation page as well. People on probation went live recently, and on here we've got the products that we've done to date. So we've got effective case supervision guides, we've got one for adults and one for the youth, and in those we talk about the overview of case supervision, and then using the Aspire model, so that's the assessment, planning, implementation, delivery and review, we go through engagement in case supervision, desistance in case supervision, and then keeping people safe. And I think we've had some good feedback because people like the inspectors' comments on the cases. So they've got the case summary and then what the inspectors found good about it. And I think that's really important because we want people to think about the why. So it's not just you do it like this because the inspectorate said it's good. It's do it like this and here's why it's good because this is the research behind it and here's the impact this is having for people on probation. So we've got a couple of other guides on there from the thematic. So there's an IOM effective practice guide and an SFO effective practice guide, and then coming soon will be the substance misuse one, which I'm really excited about. Some great examples in there. Also really keen for these to meet practitioners' requirements. So if you've got any feedback, my email address is on the website, so please feel free to bombard me with messages about how we can improve that, because I want these to be accessible to speak to some of Jake's findings. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark and Tammy. As I said, if you've got any questions, we've got quite a few coming up in the chat already, please put them in there and we will ask Mark and Tammy at the end of the presentations. So Mark, if you want to stop sharing your slides, or Tammy, we're going to move over to Kilvinda Viggers, who is a Regional Probation Director in London, who's been joined by Adam Breer, an SPO. I just wanted to check, I'm hoping we may have Sonia on, who finally joined us. Sonia, you able to give us a wave if you're here? She may be coming any minute, but anyway, we'll crack on for now. So anyway, I'm going to hand over to you, Kilvinda. Hi, Sonia. Oh, thank goodness.
No, it's been a very stressful morning, but I'm here now and I came in on the end of a really good conversation there. But anyway, I don't want to hold Kilvinda up any further.
Brilliant. Thanks. Over to you, Kilvinda.
Thanks, Sonia, you could hold me up. I too am having a digital meltdown. So I'm on my phone today with a laptop from a pool here, trying to set that up. So my notes and everything, this is me winging it. But so thank you very much to the Insight team for inviting myself and Adam to this event. It's interesting when I was looking at the Slido and seeing the word dread. I think I would concur with that from all levels, from being a practitioner up to being a director. I'm not sure which is worse, when your digital doesn't work or when you hear about an inspection coming, because they both kind of create that kind of level of stress. And that's not to kind of trivialize when you do get an inspection announcement. So what I wanted to say really was how when I was a practitioner nearly 20 years ago, I had an opportunity to be an area assessor, and that for the sort of 2 decades after really changed the way I approached inspections and being inspection ready. I think where people can get an opportunity to be an area inspector, it can change the dynamics in the teams if you're an SPO. So when I became the director of London, one of the things I really wanted to bring with that was actually that kind of working through the conflict between a gold standard OASIS where you've got all the data right in the right boxes, and actually what an area inspector or the inspectorate would be looking at, and they want to know, and I've said before, you know, if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the people in your team, then good enough is exceptional in the circumstances. So we really need to understand what you can do in the circumstances, how we manage that, how we record that, because that actually is what the inspectorate are very good at looking at and actually supporting that. So I'm not surprised with Mark's presentation where people have said after the inspection actually they felt positive, because often that is what we hear. It's the fear of it and then it not being as bad as the individual expected. But that doesn't take away the dread that managers have or ACOs have or myself as a director has, and I wouldn't want to minimise that. But actually, so what are we trying to do about it? So one of the things I did when I came into London was two things. First of all, was to put together a workshop called Risk is Everybody's Business. And that's based on the Hazel Kempshall work around risk and how you manage it and needs. So actually we started to think about the operational world, not the perfect OASIS, and then moving that into getting as many SPOs to become trained to that inspectorate level, that HMIP level. And I'm very grateful for HMIP to accommodate in that. Unfortunately, kind of COVID got in the way with our scheduling, but we did manage to have some virtual events with quite a lot of our SPOs. And the next level down would be to cascade that, and that's why Adam's here, because he's been a real ally in this. One of those SPOs is up there who wants to change the culture in the office, wants to work with HMIP and others to show what good looks like in difficult circumstances. So I don't want to take Adam's time now, because I think it's important to hear from an SPO. What I would just add, though, in terms of the dread, inspections are resource intensive, so I won't want to take away the fact that that is something that we need to look at as well. So Adam, can I pass to you, because I just think your operational perspective is probably what people want to hear.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kilvinda, and good morning, everyone. It's really nice to have so many people here, especially on a Monday morning, the most painful time of the week. So thank you for everyone who's made the effort to join us today. And just to clarify, neither Kilvinda or I are using any slides, so you're not missing anything if you can't see any slides. I think this is something that hopefully you'll see we're both really passionate about, and just wanted to speak to you kind of from the heart today. Like Kilvinda, I've also been a local inspector. And I think at any kind of mass gathering of anything to do with inspections or quality standards, I always plug that. And anybody in the room who in the virtual room, that gets an opportunity to do anything like that, I really cannot recommend it highly enough. I think coming on the back of Jake's presentation this morning has been really interesting for me, because a lot of what I wanted to say today really kind of flows on from what Jake has said. So as Kilvinda said, I was one of the SPOs that attended the HMIP standards briefing, which took place around January time. And then our role was to then cascade that down. And I also took part in a kind of all London briefing to really make sure the message got spread far and wide. And I think what I would particularly note, maybe 2 or 3 main takeaways from that are kind of interlinked. Jake's research about the feelings, and obviously what we saw earlier in the Slido, the dread, the anxiety, the fear, all of that comes up, I think shows, unfortunately, that maybe we are approaching things in slightly the wrong way. And I think especially when you compare that to then the feedback that comes afterwards, which is so positive once they've experienced that with inspectors. Well, if our staff are having a tougher time working with us to get ready for the inspection than they are with the actual inspectors, then I think that shows that maybe something, the balance has got lost somewhere. And I think where that balance maybe does get lost is the fear of the unknown. And I think if I maybe just have one main takeaway today, I think what the briefing standards has enabled us to do in terms of us that have gone to the briefings and disseminating the learning, is to take away some of that fear factor and some of that unknown quantity of an inspection. because forewarned is forearmed, as they say. And I think so much of that fear comes from, it's inspection. We don't know what it's about. What are they going to look at? What are they going to ask me? Am I going to trip myself up, and that kind of thing. So the briefing, the briefing on the standards takes away a lot of that fear factor, and I hope what that does going forward, that's not just for the practitioners, for the probation practitioners. I think that's for us as management as well. And so what I'm really, really hopeful for going forward is that the experience of preparing for an inspection, I'm really hoping is different going forward. In fact, I think there's probably a lot of people here that would say, I think the idea of preparing for an inspection is a little bit of an oxymoron anyway, to be honest. And I think, like some of the people that Jake interviewed said, an inspection is supposed to reflect a reality, not a sanitized reality, but an actual reality. And I think that is then another takeaway that perhaps can take away some fear, because I really see, maybe this is a little bit naive, but I see an inspection as a win-win scenario, because if we do well, great, it's good news. And there will always be good news to take out of an inspection. I think that's a really key point that we need to remain focused on. But if there's bad news, or if there's room for improvement, to me, that's okay, because those things need to come out into the light. If they exist, and we know they will, in a job and in an organisation as complex as ours, we know that there will be pockets of practice that we're not so keen on, and things that need improvement. And they can't change unless we know about them. So, as I say, for me, then an inspection is not something to fear in that sense, because we're one way or the other, whether it's good or bad, we'll learn something. And you never must pass up an opportunity to learn. So, as I say, I hope that that can change our experience of preparing for an inspection going forward. And helping us not to focus on the wrong things, but to focus on what we now actually do know about an inspection, and take away some of that unknown quantity for the people, the practitioners that will be interviewed about their case. And I think a point on that is that what the practitioners often don't realise is that they are not being inspected as a person. And I know that's easy to say for people because it's their case and it's them that's being interviewed, but our probation practitioners are a window to the organisation. They're not the people being inspected themselves. They are a conduit for HMIP to conduct an inspection on our organisation as a whole. So I think straight away we can take that kind of individual fear away from people and just really try and empower them to be the best window that they can for the service. And I think as a manager, to be able to give that kind of leadership and direction, and to have that confidence yourself, really should be able to take away from the anxiety that people feel. Because if you're equipped, you can better equip your staff. And coming off the back of those briefings, I think we're so much better equipped as a management team now to really prepare people in the right ways, emotionally, I would say, rather than, in terms of sweeping up a case file or that kind of thing. I just want to move on briefly then to putting that into something a bit more concrete and practice related. So I think what we've been able to see from working alongside HMIP is to really reduce down what an inspection means, to take it from abstract to concrete, and really be able to say from a broad level, okay, this is what we're looking for. I think a lot of the dread and anxiety comes from perhaps our own internal audit processes. Practitioners may have had serious further offence reviews and that kind of thing. And those are probably in the back of their mind when they're thinking about, oh, now my case is going to be inspected. And I think another real key takeaway for me is the realism of the HMIP standards, of what HMIP are looking for. And I think Kilvinda hinted at this earlier. Kilvinda likes to say, good enough is good enough. And I think we'd all agree with that, especially in difficult circumstances. Actually, as she said, sometimes good enough is actually really good, if not exceptional. And I think we can take that attitude forward with us, because what we now know is if I'm preparing one of my practitioners for an inspection, I can sit there and say to them, look, there are 4 areas that are going to be looked at. Have you assessed this person's risk and needs? Have you then made a plan to do something about those risk and needs? Having made that plan, have you actually implemented it? And have you reviewed and updated that plan and changed it where necessary? If you can answer yes to all of those questions, your inspection is going to go fine. And again, it's about peeling the curtain back and bringing those things to life, and showing, you know, that this is something we can achieve. You know, they're not looking for perfection. They're not going through things with a fine tooth comb and looking for things to trip you up. They're looking for, you know, evidence of good practice in those 4 areas. And I think when you bring things down to that level, you know, that is so much more impactful for a practitioner than bringing out a massive audit form, you know, getting the red pen out and marking everything that hasn't been done. So I think to draw to a close, because I'm aware we're running over time. I think when you have that knowledge, then as a manager and as a leader for your teams, what that really allows you to do, I said earlier, the idea of preparing for an inspection doesn't sit right with me. But actually, with the knowledge that we now have, we can be preparing for an inspection all year round, every day, or every time we look at a case, every time we have supervision with a staff member, because we can internalize those expectations and those quality standards. And so actually, it's then not even a case of let's get ready for an inspection, because again, what does that mean? You get ready, you dust up a case, you shine it up. Okay, the inspection's done now, we can breathe again. And you've wasted all that time and learning. So actually, if we're using the lessons that we've learned, and if we're using the what HMIP have kindly shared with us and brought us in to share their expertise with us, then actually we can be doing that work all year round. And so actually, if an inspection lands tomorrow, we can be inspection ready. And so I think that's what I would like to leave everybody with today. If there's one thing, it's that this is something we can do, and that we need to take away that fear factor and just look at what is realistic, and look at what the expectations are from a ground level. And I think if we can do those things, which we're now so much better equipped to do, then hopefully those words that we're seeing at the beginning here will be very different if we do this again. So thanks again for everybody that's joined today, and look forward to any questions later on.
Thanks, Adam. Govinda. Sonia, do you want to take over from here, or do you want me to introduce the next panelists?
Do you want to introduce the next panelists, and then I'll come in when we start the Q&A, Nick?
Brilliant. All right, so we've got our final 2 presentations now. So we have got Deborah Perkins from OSAG, and for those of you outside the organisation, that's Operational Systems Assurance Group, and also Heather Wright from Effective Practice and Service Improvement Group, EPSIG, both HQ functions, talking about the support available from that side of things for our operational colleagues. So I'll hand straight over to you. Thank you.
Hi, yes, thanks, Nick. Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, as Nick says, my name's Deborah, and I work within the Operational Systems Assurance Group, otherwise known as OSAG, and I'm really pleased to have been invited today to share an example of OSAG working together with regional performance and quality teams to support quality practice. And what I'm going to be doing, I think, in my short presentation is picking up on some of the themes that other speakers have spoken about before, particularly on preparing for inspection and being inspection ready. And it flows really nicely on from the point that Adam was making at the end of his section about that kind of baseline of being ready at all times. So paying attention regularly to the quality of practice at or nearest the point of delivery, otherwise known as first tier assurance. This provides a baseline knowledge of what performance looks like, and this in turn can inform any improvement activity that may be required and helps the region to be confident about the quality of the service that it's providing at any given point, and therefore being inspection ready at any given point. Within the probation service, the core quality management framework, or the CQMF, provides a mechanism through which performance and quality teams support ongoing attention to quality within their regions. And this CQMF was designed by the reform programme working alongside operational performance and quality leads. And they were from both the legacy CRC and NPS organisations to ensure that all of that expertise was included within this framework. And it draws together the probation service's primary assurance and improvement activities into a coherent national framework. And if you haven't seen it already, it's on Equip. So if you need to know more and you've got access to Equip, that's where you can find it. So as part of the development of the CQMF, the working group commissioned OSAG to design an audit tool to support regions in that ongoing monitoring of quality of practice in a way that allows for consistency across regions and measures against organisational quality standards. And I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes outlining the development of this tool and how OSAG designed it to support regional P&Q teams to carry out this first tier level assurance. Oh, thank you, Liz. I've got Liz doing my slides for me because I'm not very good at doing slides and talking. So yeah, thanks, Liz. So that's this tool here. This slide here shows the key areas of design within what we are calling the Regional Case Audit Tool, or otherwise known as the RCAT. And our original brief from the CQMF working group was to create a tool that enabled high-level first-tier assurance that looks at core elements of sentence management practice and measures against the probation services organisational standards, to provide a tool that will shine a light on areas of practice that are carried out well, but importantly as well, those that might need some further attention. And within OSAG, we've worked really closely with operational P&Q managers to ensure that the design of this tool includes consideration of various other requirements and operational factors. And I've outlined some of those on these slides here. So it needs to provide information at different levels within a region, at team level, at PDU level, and at that regional level as well. And it needs to identify where practice is good and where action may be needed. And importantly, we were asked not to replicate information that could be found elsewhere. So, for example, a MIS report, there's no point this tool creating something that you can pull off from a different place. And I want to focus a little bit on the bubble that talks about aligning with regional resources. So this was a really key ask, and I think it's fair to say that it's been one of the most challenging aspects of the design. We needed to create a tool that was of a length that regions are able to implement it, given the limited resources available, but also that provides enough information to be meaningful. And this means that it can't go into each and every aspect of sentence management because the tool would then become too unwieldy, but it must capture key aspects of sentence management quality. And getting that balance right has been really important, and we've really drawn from the expertise of quality and quality teams within the regions to make sure that we get that right. So at the moment, we are finishing off testing the tool, and regions have been really helpful in supporting with this. In fact, just before I came on this call this morning, I had some feedback from the South Central region from the testing that they've done on it, and that's going to be really helpful in us making those final changes to make sure that it works really well. The tool itself, we're aiming to complete that by the end of September, and then we're going to hand that over to performance and quality teams for regional implementation and management. So OSAG will remain involved insofar as we will revise and review the tool alongside the annual review of the core quality management framework, and we'll make sure that it remains aligned with service expectations and OSAG methodology. But otherwise, the tool is intended for regions to implement and manage locally. So that's one piece of work that OSAG are doing that aims to support that ongoing attention to quality that people have spoken about this morning. And I'm now going to hand over to Heather Wright, who works within the Effective Practice and Service Improvement Group, to talk about some of the work that they do.
Thank you, Deborah. Good morning, everybody. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak to you today as part of the event. I'm a little bit aware we're trying to manage the time, so I will press on if people want to put any questions in the sidebar. That's really very welcome. So some people on the call will be familiar with some of the things that EPSIG has in place to support probation practitioners, and looping back to what Jake and Tammy were speaking about earlier, SEEDS 2 is really important in terms of the person-centred approaches and observations of practice and reflective practice discussion. So part of that SEEDS approach, allowing for practitioners to work with their line managers and develop their skills and the quality of their work, and also supporting people to gain confidence and aligning this to the reflective practice supervision standards, so the RPSS as it's probably now known, and that explains what the expectations are for managers. EPSIG also develop quality development tools and have done for a number of years now, and they show what a quality report and quality of practice looks like. They are intended as development tools, and so although some of those are reported in for performance reporting purposes, for example, the parole, so the PAROM quality development tool, that data is drawn from that, because as people will hopefully know, after 3 assessments of the correct quality, then probation practitioners don't need to be countersigned, and then they can have their annual check of that quality of that parole report. It's important to say that the PAROM quality assurance framework and QDT was created in collaboration with the parole board. Other examples of QDTs are around victim contact, and that one's currently being reviewed, management oversight, and court reports, so the different types of court reports that we have, and also enforcement, so breach reports. That's just an overview and not an exhaustive list of what quality development tools there are. These are reviewed annually, and they are reviewed in response to emerging evidence, and for this context, certainly around HMI probation findings. On occasion, there'll be changes in legislation, which will also mean that these will need to be reviewed. A most recent example of a review of a quality development tool would be the review of the AQA, so the assessment quality assurance, which looks at the OASIS. And that was most recently reviewed in response to the HMI probation report on race equality. We're responsible for guidance and frameworks, for example, the recent touchpoints models. So that was created and commissioned as a result of HMI probation findings and other outcomes after the case of Joseph McCann. Moving on to the My Learning platform. So in terms of your continuous professional development, how you might want to further that, this is really important, and it relates to other ways to develop your learning from EPSIG products. So within that platform, you hopefully will know about bite-sized videos, and some of these are developed in collaborations with researchers and academics. Some of these are again informed by HMI probation recommendations, and one example I will use is around the sexual offending context. So thinking about dedicated videos on the work, and again featuring academic staff and service users. There was references before about service users and how we might get them involved in the work. So that's one area, one example of that. There's also e-learning for probation practitioners and virtual face-to-face training on sexual offending. Again, the list isn't exhaustive. I've tried to make it in context for the event on Insights today. We also have 7-minute briefings, and these have been developed on topics such as autism, county lines, how you might advise around social media use for your service users, and stalking. These can be found on Equip by searching 7-minute briefing as a document. That usually works better than a keyword. Again, that's just a few and not an exhaustive list. So you might be thinking, well, how do we engage with regions? It's really, really important. We have practitioners in abundance on the call, which is really, really brilliant. And what we do is we hold practitioner reference groups and working groups. And my colleague Deborah, she talked about testing products and having people give feedback about how they work from regions. So that's really, really important, because that's where the actual tools, guidance frameworks are going to be used in practice. We also have a national quality group, which sits as a subgroup of the strategic performance and quality group, and that's now chaired in a region by Gabriel Amawe from South Central. So again, a really solid alignment. Part of the NQG is an attendance from senior probation officers that are looking after quality development teams, so QDOs in regions, and that's really, really important that we have their engagement and attendance in that meeting. So if you'd like to know more about how that works, of course, speak to your QDO SPO, or you can reach out to our functional mailbox. We have a functional mailbox, and your questions will be very welcome in that. Okay, thank you very much for your time. And I'd like to now hand over to Sonia Flynn for the next section.
Thank you, Heather. Sorry, Sonia, did you want me to introduce the next Slido?
Yeah, if you introduce that, and then I'll step in.
Brilliant. So thank you to all of the panelists. We've had a really, really great range of views and perspectives, and it's been really fascinating. I can see that lots of chat and questions coming up, which you'll have an opportunity to ask. But before we do that, we've got a second Slido for you. So if you can get your apps ready or the browser, And Charlotte, if you wouldn't mind showing that on screen. So that's the same number as you had before, 723284. And this time the question is, and you can answer in slightly longer words length this time, because it's not a cloud, it comes up more as a chat. What do you think we could do? So reflecting on everything you've heard today, what do you think we could do to improve the way inspections are delivered in probation? And that could be nationally, regionally, or locally. So it's going to take a little bit longer for people to type. I know we've already had quite a few suggestions in the chat already about sort of involving people with lived experience. So we'd have an opportunity to talk about that, and stakeholders, reducing the blame culture. And someone saying, I think we've already started, which is good news. Aligning national standards and HMIP standards. Don't tell us you're coming. So some people prefer no prep at all. Gathering data centrally. Yeah. Introducing a hybrid model, including self-inspections. Clarifying expectations. Minimizing the anxiety pre-inspection. That's been a big theme coming out of today, isn't it? Less fear of outcomes at senior management level. No prep allowed. Okay, I'm quite surprised how many people are saying that on this call. Actually, we've seen that come up quite a lot, that we shouldn't prep at all. And improving the whole culture around learning. Not set regions in a league table, so sort of reducing that competition element. Better use of technology. Holding to account on action plans. Perhaps people aren't aware of how action plans are implemented and what actions are being taken. Okay, so we've got keep coming in, because what we'll do is we'll collate all of these afterwards, and we'll give we will be feeding all this back to the organisation. So please continue to put your comments in, even if they're not shown. But Sonia, I'll hand back over to you for some of the questions. We've had some already in the chat, which we can feed to you if you need to, but over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Nick. And I'm so sorry I missed the beginning of the session for some reason that I can't explain, and neither can IT. I was removed from the system. Anyway, I'm back on now, so that's good. It's great to hear, and I've been reading since I joined a lot of the observations and questions in the chat. And I'd be quite keen in the time we've got available to throw open for questions. I have to say, when Jake completed his research, he did come and speak to myself and the regional probation directors about the key findings, and we listened very carefully. And we do want to make changes in the way that we prepare, because clearly having announced inspections does create anxiety, and actually what we want to do is use the inspections as, you know, in a way which allows us to learn, to recognise and understand where we need to be better. That being said, I guess there's always an inevitability when things are scored and assessed that you always get that sense of anticipation. And because I've been around the probation service a long time, I do actually remember that certainly in the early years of my career, inspection reports weren't actually written with scores or ratings. And it was about the mid-2000s, I think, Mark, when the then Chief Inspector, Andrew Bridges, did introduce into the inspection process, which I guess was part of that kind of managerial kind of approach to performance management that was very much evident in the public sector at that time, really came to the fore. So once scores and ratings were introduced, it was inevitable, I guess, that what would lead from that would be league tables and comparisons in a way that you couldn't draw comparisons with a written script. I'm not suggesting in any way that we go back to not having assessment and ratings. They're hugely important in terms of thinking about where we focus our attention. But I do think we have to embrace the inspection culture as more of a learning exercise, and that we as senior leaders in probation have a responsibility to do that in our response to Jake's findings. The other observations I'd like to make, it was great to hear from Adam and also the work that's been happening in London. And I really like that term, we have to be inspection ready. We live by the inspection standards. So getting greater synergy between the way we're inspected and how we work day to day will clearly assist in moving away from that sense of a kind of cliff edge of inspection. Actually, it's something that just happens, we live by it. And I also just want to reference OSAG as well, because I think they've done a tremendous job in recent years in the way that they've developed that front line of defence, or the audits that they conduct, because actually they're really accurate. And we're not in, that running commentary that OSAG provide us with is then reflected, as I've seen it in recent times, in the observations played by the inspectorate. But obviously the inspectorate can build on that because of the capacity they have to take a wider view of the way in which casework's been conducted. And I guess what I mean by that is the richness that the inspectorate bring to us, both in terms of their interviews with key stakeholders and partners, with the judiciary, with the third sector, and increasingly, and I know this is something which has had a number of very positive comments, building the way in which we seek feedback from those that we supervise. And certainly as we start to stand up our new engagement forums and the contract for working with those that we supervise across all the regions, because at the moment our approach to service use engagement is somewhat patchy, largely kind of legacy or footprint from the way that the CRCs previously worked. And clearly, to, I think, meet the new expectations of the inspectorate, we need a more consistent approach in the way that we involve those that we supervise, both in giving us regular feedback and more closely engaged in terms of the way we design and evaluate our services. So that, I think, will be a very welcome step forward later this year. So I think we do have a running commentary, and we should use that, as I say, to take that kind of fear out of inspection and actually embrace the richness that the inspectorate bring in terms of understanding and evaluating the kind of the levers which can improve the way that we work. I also really welcome the new inspection regime in terms of not inspecting huge geographies, whether they were the old probation divisions or indeed the CRC geographies. They were huge. I think actually to get down into levels of inspection which focus around a county, a PDU, probation delivery unit, I think will give us far more useful information, and particularly with partners, I have to say, because we know that so much of good probation is actually produced through good partnerships. So by having something which is very meaningful in the way that it's presented, because it is more local, whether that's Durham or Kent or the West, Birmingham, I think we'll be able to hook in our partners so that they can either celebrate with us, and hopefully there will be lots of celebration, or that they understand where they need to work with us more closely to fix the things that the inspectorate have told us we need to fix or improve. Now, that being said, I know there's been some angst, and some voices have said, well, hang on a minute, if you're inspecting at very local PDU level, does that let off the hook the regional probation director and the regional leaders? Absolutely not. Because whilst that geography might be smaller, it's the whole of, and everyone who's represented in the region who will be inspected in that geography. whether it's the way in which the regional team are making decisions about the allocation of resource, the deployment of unpaid work, the way in which, as I say, our contracts are managed with voluntary sector. It's the essence of the region that will be assessed in that PDU, in that boundary. The other thing to say, I think we've learned a huge amount, and I'm sure Mark would say this, in terms of how we inspect, or they inspect during and have inspected during COVID. I think the ability to have virtual meetings, both with key stakeholders and to bring together wider groups of staff in this kind of Teams format, has actually given greater reach. And again, I'm pleased that the Inspectorate will be continuing to use virtual means to get that greater reach, whether that's ensuring that we do have a good representation of magistrates who can give a very strong account of how our work in the courts is operating, or indeed engage